Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club. It's Tuesday, so it's time for our weekly hangout. My name is Colin Monroe, and this is Tony Cooper. Tony, how are you?
Well, it's good to be here.
Yep. We've got a few people watching already, which is great. So we've got AJ, we got Mayamar, Satkuk. I hope I'm sure I'm pronouncing your names wrong, but I do apologize. Camis and Lolly Lolly. Great to see you again, Lolly Lolly. Haven't seen you for a while. But yeah, and Balbal, of course. Great to see you too, Balbal. Oh, Gaspar, great. So so as always, if you are joining us for the first time, all we do on these live streams is we are just here to answer your questions. We don't really have too much prepared to say. We're just here to hang out with you and answer your questions. So get those questions coming in, otherwise we will run out of things to say. Now, this week is a little bit special because, as you may know, if you've been watching regularly, this year and this month especially, we're really trying to ramp up what we're doing at the English Language Club. So we've put out a couple of extra videos, and we've got a course that's just gone live on our website called Inside English. And we're also going to be doing a lot more for members of the channel and Patreons. So one of those things is that we're doing a weekly Zoom meeting. And we've done 2 so far. Gaspar joined us, which has been great. But we'd really love to get a few more people joining. So tomorrow's live stream is going to be open to everybody. Looks like we've lost Tony, but I think we've got him back now.
Sorry,
we lost you there, Tony. It's okay. Yeah, so tomorrow is going to be open to everybody. And I'm going to give you the information about how to join that at some point in the live stream, okay? If I do forget, remind me later on. I'm not going to give it to you just yet, but I will give it to you at some point later on. So, yeah, I look forward to meeting all of you tomorrow. So, Tony, have we got any good questions so far? I think we had one from AJ and one from Balbal.
Yeah. We have several questions already so far. Yes. The first one, chronologically, was from AJ.
Right. Whoops. Yeah, let me just get that up. About American English and British English, right?
Yes. So AJ
says, go for it.
How is it best to describe the nuanced differences between UK and USA English? So this is interesting because you're using the term nuance, so not necessarily just the obvious differences. So I think it's interesting to talk about the difference between written English and spoken English, right? Because spoken English includes some things like your accent, which is not, there's no technical difference between USA and British English in terms of the way it's spoken or the accent, because that depends on local regional accents, right? The most well-known difference is the... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's more complicated. It's more complicated than just British and American, because there's lots of different British accents and there's lots of different American accents.
The most well-known difference is the way that R's are pronounced inside a word, right? Mother or heart are pronounced with a very solid R in most American accents or Canadian accents or whatever. But in most British accents, it's pronounced more like, take it away.
Mother, father. Is that what you mean?
Heart.
Oh, mother. Oh, heart.
Yeah.
So the R.
So,
are you talking about the R?
The R is pronounced differently. Yeah, exactly. So, however, that's not hard and fast. There are British people, local accents, local dialects where they pronounce R's more like an American, and there are American accents where they pronounce R's more like people in in Britain do, right? So spoken English, it's not really, there's not an official difference, but in written English there is. Spelling is different, right? In a lot of British or UK English, but also Canadian English, Australian English, there's OU in a lot of places where there's just an O in American English. Color, for instance, is spelled COLOR in US English, but in Canadian or British English, it's COLOUR.
Yeah.
Another example is at the end of a word, when there's an sound at an end of a word. So, for instance, center, or well, we just use center. In American English, that's spelled CENTER, whereas in Canadian or British English, it's spelled CENTRE. Right? So the nuances are mostly to do with spelling more than anything else, in terms of the official differences between US English and UK English.
Yeah. Now we could go on like this, talking about listing the differences between British and American English, and that would be, I mean, I think that would be something great for making like maybe a series of videos. I was going to say a video, but I think it would be more like a series of videos, and even then we wouldn't cover everything.
Exactly.
And even if we did cover everything, that doesn't include Australian English and and Canadian English and South African English. There's lots of other countries where they speak English as a first language.
Right.
So to sum it all up, I think American English is kind of it's sort of simplified in a way.
Yes.
To make it, there's a lot of things in British English that are kind of complicated and illogical. They don't seem to make any sense until you look back at the fact that these words come from Greek or Latin, or and I think a lot of the changes to American English sort of ignores that and makes things simpler and makes things more literal, especially in the vocabulary. Like we say the sidewalk. Sorry, in American English you say the sidewalk. In British we say the pavement.
Right.
Well, it's a sidewalk. It's where you walk, and it's by the side of the road. It's very literal. It's very easy to remember in a way. And lots of words.
Whereas both the road and the sidewalk and people's driveways and parking lots and what's it called, landing strips in airports, all of those things are paved.
Yeah.
You could even have pavers in your garden, right? Yeah.
And in terms of pronunciation differences, not including accent, but if there are words that are pronounced differently or spelled differently, it's spelled more phonetically. Not English is not very phonetic, as in it's not written how it's spelled all the time, and that's true both in British and American. But American is a little more phonetic, so it's easier for spelling. But I don't think we need to go into any more detail now. Apart from Lolly did have a follow-up question. She says, where is it? Do Americans use the glottal T? So the glottal T. What's the glottal T?
It's not. So like we talk about better, right? There's no glottal T per se, but we use a glottal sound instead of a T sometimes.
Yeah, it's the glottal,
so in British,
the glottal stop is on the T sometimes. Is that right?
Yes. Well, I mean, so a glottal stop is that like that better, like that, where you close off your airflow and then start up again. It's not used very commonly in English at all, but it is used in a few places. And so what you're talking about is this when it's used instead of a T sound. And that's more of a British thing. The best example I can think of for the glottal stop in other than this would be like kind of a thing, or no, is not quite a glottal. It's not quite a stop. It's more of a partial. But so in terms of using it instead of a T, not so much, though. I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up in. Well, I know it shows up in some regional accents, right? But just generally,
glottal T is definitely a thing that people talk about. And I think it is, well, like you said, it's when we sort of don't pronounce the T very, very strongly.
Exactly.
Like the word better instead of better. Yeah. Although both pronunciations are correct. It's just a lot of people in British As another example.
British. Yeah.
So we'll miss that out. And it's the same. And you do have the same thing in American. We've talked about this before, but it's slightly different because instead of just skipping it out completely, in American it becomes more like a D, not a D.
Right, which makes it not a glottal stop anymore. Yeah, exactly. Right. So glottal stops are used in both British and American English, but generally speaking, they're not very common in English. They're not one of the official sounds that you'll learn, right? Like it's not on the pronunciation chart, right? Because it's a very uncommonly used sound. It's sort of a niche thing, right? I mean, it's on the IPA. There's an IPA for the glottal stop, but it's not one of the ones that we talk about for English.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's a good idea. We should start thinking and planning a series on the difference between American English and British English, and then because we've talked about this so much in the live streams,
we do.
It'd be great to just be able to refer people to our series when it's done. Okay, now Balbal's got a question about a particular word. He says,
"This is a great question."
Yeah, what does it look like when a person squirms?
There can be degrees of it, right? So you can see someone be like, and you could say, "Oh, they were squirming with frustration or whatever," or it could be really exaggerated, like, "Oh, I don't want to answer that question." So think like a worm wiggling, except how a human body looks like when it does that.
It's a sort of like, it looks like the person is very uncomfortable, not necessarily physically, but possibly physically as well. Like they're so uncomfortable with the situation or a challenge, or something they have to do, or something they're thinking about or looking at, that it makes them so uncomfortable that it shows physically, like something like that. That's what it is.
The extreme of this is, think of a little kid that has to go to the bathroom and they're like squirming, and they won't, or a kid that just doesn't want to sit still, and so they're constantly moving, they're squirming, right? And that's such a great question, Balbal, because squirm is a hard word to look up in a dictionary, right? Because it's a motion, it's an action. What does it actually look like, right? Whereas this is a perfect place to ask a question like that, because we can just do it and show you exactly what it looks like.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So Lolly has a question here. She says, "It's interesting to me, or it's interesting for me. Please, which one is correct?" So now I want to say they're both correct, but certainly to me, it's interesting to me would be correct in more situations. Is for me ever correct? It's interesting for me.
Interesting for me,
because it all depends on the verb. Not the verb. On the word interesting.
Yeah.
So the adjective interesting. Can something be interesting for someone, or is it always interesting?
Unless this is some kind of a niche case, I don't think it means. I don't think it means what you think it means. Interesting. Something that's interesting too. That is the default. That is the normal. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be a situation where you could rephrase it to make sense for, but in any situation where you're just using that phrase in a normal sentence, it's going to be to. Things are interesting to you.
So that's a sort of collocation, the words that go together. So interesting, always just think to.
Yes.
There may be some exceptions to that rule where you could say for, but as a general rule, it's going to be to.
Yeah. So for instance, you might say, well, for me, it's an interesting subject. Because to doesn't go very well at the beginning of a sentence. But if you're saying interesting, you wouldn't usually say interesting for me. In fact, that will stand out as sounding a little off.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Good question.
Cedra says, "Hello, sir. After a long time. Hello to you. You're very welcome. Welcome back." So we've got a few more people watching now. So I'm just going to remind you, I said it at the beginning, but I don't think many people are watching. We've started doing Zoom calls, so we'll actually be able to speak to you and see you and hear you speaking, and have a conversation, as well as these live streams. That's going to be tomorrow. Now, normally it's just going to be for members and Patreons, but tomorrow it's going to be open to everybody. And at some point during this live stream, I'm going to give you the information you need to get on that Zoom call with us tomorrow. So yes, I really look forward to meeting you all tomorrow. Stay tuned for the details.
Also, go ahead and keep your questions coming. Let us know what questions you guys have so that we can answer them.
Yes. So HWK has a question here. Could you recommend any website or app that gives out English conversation or communication platform for free or for payment or whatever? So you mean where you can actually have a conversation with somebody? Well, I suppose I just did with the Zoom. You can join us. You can join us every week on Zoom. Tomorrow it's going to be free. After that, it's going to be just for members, so it'll be paid, but it's very reasonable. There are a lot of other sites. I mean, you can book a teacher through a site called Buddy School. I used to do some classes there. I'll just write that in the chat. There's lots of teachers on there. I don't teach there anymore, but yeah, lots of people do teach there, and it's you can find people teaching quite reasonable prices. I'm not really, I mean, there's lots of them. I'm not really, I haven't tried many myself, you see. That's why I can talk about Buddy School, but not really any others. And I mean, a lot of other YouTubers do similar kind of things with Zoom on Zoom calls for members and things. But maybe if you guys have got any recommendations that you can share with us, that'll be great, because you might have tried more things than me myself. Yeah. So yeah, sorry if that's not as helpful as it could have been. But yeah, I mean, what I would recommend is join the club and become a member and
join our weekly Zoom.
Yeah. Now we've got the YouTube memberships, but we've also got Patreon. And at the moment, I think I'm pushing people more towards Patreon at the moment, because we just got that started, really. Yeah, we've been a little disappointed with YouTube, how YouTube works. So yeah, try Patreon if you want to join up, and you'll get access to all of the Zoom calls in the future.
And specifically, let us know, because one of the reasons we went to Patreon is because we saw that many people who wanted to join become members of the club weren't able to join on YouTube because it wasn't available in their countries. So we're trying Patreon. So use the link below. Please let us know if Patreon works in your country, right? Because we want to make sure that it's open to as many people as possible that want to become members. It's spelled with an E. It's on the screen here. Patreon with an E.
Yes. Patreon.com/learnenglish. It's also in the description. If you look down, there's a list of links. I think it's like the second one, or maybe the top one. Yeah. Yes, that's a really good point. Yeah, because we have talked about it in the past, and people in the live streams have said, "Oh, I can't. I really want to join, but I can't." So hopefully, with Patreon, we'll be able to reach more people. Do let us know if you can. Yeah, if you can. Thanks, HWK. But yeah, if other people could have a quick check and have a look at that, see if you can get in. That'll be great.
It's the link in the description where it says "Join the club." Yeah.
Yeah. So it's patreon.com/learnenglish. You'll see when you go that there's not a lot there yet. That's because literally we just set it up this week, in the last few days. But there will be more and more things going up there, especially the Zoom meetings. Those are the main thing. Right. So let's see. Have we got any other good questions?
We've got one question from Balbal.
Yeah. So Balbal says, "Is alley a place somewhere in America? I heard a lot of celebrities use this word, not relating to a narrow road." Alley.
So this might be something. Okay, so an alley it's technically mean a narrow road. But I don't know if this is true in other places, but in the US, it refers to any kind of strip of something. So, for example, they talk about Tornado Alley, which is like the states of Kansas and Nebraska and parts of Iowa and South Dakota and other places. I mean, it's a huge area, and it's not even particularly narrow. It's not like a long, narrow strip. It's just a space that is generally shaped like a rectangle-ish, even though it's huge. You hear this a lot. There's a place in Canada, in Red Deer, I think it's called Gasoline Alley, and it's like four roads. So there's 2 roads on either side of a major highway. So it's lots and lots and lots and lots of roads, but it just has gas station and restaurant, one after another for like along a whole stretch of the road. It's in Alberta, in Canada. So we use this phrase alley just to mean a place. It sometimes is generally rectangle shaped, but it's not necessarily narrow. It's just an area. So you hear this kind of thing pops up all the time.
It's not necessarily narrow, although I think it is necessarily something that you go down and you travel down and pass things sequentially.
Right, yeah, maybe so. But I mean, again, Tornado Alley isn't like that. I think it's just something that has, it's another word. It's a cool word that can mean an area, a section, a place, right? I think there's generally this rectangular shape to it, or like a sequential, like a path through it. But it honestly doesn't matter because it's just become one of those cool things. Like we use center. Center used to be like the center of a city, like where the central squares were. But now you can have there's a health center, there's a nutrition center, right? You could even have a nutrition center inside a supermarket or something like that, right? So it's a word that has just become really cool to use for a place. And so
any word that it's a sort of it's very synonymous with street and road. Alley is like another type. And all of these words get used in names for streets. So like Diagon Alley in the Harry Potter books is another example. But yeah, going back to the question, is it I mean, alley, just alley on its own is not a specific place, but I'm sure lots of places are called something alley.
Exactly. Yes. Even places that are not alleys, that are not, a narrow road or anything like that. There are lots of places that have that as part of the place name.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Let's have a look. Got any other good questions?
I think Balbal had another question.
Another one? Is this the one?
Yes.
So Balbal says, these words, rule, principle, concept, theory, and fundamental are similar to me. Would you explain the meanings so I can distinguish them? Good question. Okay.
This is really, really interesting because each one of these does mean something very distinct. They're not interchangeable really. And so they do all have a distinct meaning, though some of them are very similar. The first two are probably the hardest to differentiate. So a principle is usually something that is true or that is valid. Nobody made it true or valid, though many people will say, hey, they'll point this out. So for instance, hurting people is wrong is a good example of a principle, because lots of people have noticed this and said this over the years, but it's not something that people have gotten together and they've said, we're making a rule, hurting people is wrong. It's just a true principle. Whereas a rule is something that has been either decided upon or ordered, like similar to a law, right? So math has rules that people have agreed on. You have to do this, but math also has principles, things that are just generally true, right? So a good way to understand this is a rule somebody has to tell you, but a principle you can understand that for yourself, right? Does that make sense?
I think so. Just about. It's quite complicated, but yes.
So a principle is something that you can know is true on your own. You just understand it. Whereas a rule, someone tells you. So like there's rules against speeding, right? Like there's so the speed limit is a rule, or like the rules at school, things like this. Whereas, for instance, your school might have a rule: don't cheat on tests. But but that's also a principle. Cheating is wrong. Cheating is wrong is the principle, because you can just kind of understand that in yourself. Whereas don't cheat is the rule that your school has because they have to tell you, right?
Yeah. So
the other three
are like an idea, and the rule
different.
is written down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
that's another a good example. Yeah. The other three. So a concept is an idea. Usually we use the word concept for a very specific idea, like a plan for something, or a specific part of the way things work, but it's just an idea. Theory is, people use the word theory, they think it means something that we don't know if it's true or not. That's not really it. A theory is a grand model, like an idea for how things work, that you use to explain things. So the theory of gravity is that all objects pull on each other, right? So that sounds very simple, but it's more than just a simple idea. It's a whole model for how the world works, right? This kind of thing. So it doesn't, when we say theory, it doesn't mean it's something that we don't know if it's true or not. But people often say it that way. They say, like, I have a theory, but really what they mean is I have an idea and I don't know if it's true.
Yeah.
Theory is a grand explanation. Sometimes you might have that. For instance, someone could say, I have a theory for why some countries are poor and some countries are not. And it has to do with how close they are to the Suez Canal or something like that, right? So you could have an idea that is a theory if it's a big, grand idea for how things work, right? But oftentimes we just use it when we say, I have an idea, I don't know if it's true or not. But that's not really what it means.
But it is because that's how people use it. So,
well, kind of. I think this is a good example of something where the word, if it continues to be used this way over time, it will eventually lose that meaning. But it's something that I think a lot of people are misusing, and is actually problematic. Because,
right.
Yeah. But that is true.
So it is important to know that is a common misuse, because that's almost as good as it being a meaning.
Right. Depending on, you will hear people say it. But even grammatically, the way they say it implies that it's some kind of a big idea, even though sometimes people aren't. Like, people will sometimes say, I have a theory that you're hungry. Well, no, that's not a theory. But sometimes you'll really think, I have a feeling you're hungry, would be more correct. Anyway, and then a fundamental doesn't have to be an idea, though it can be. It's just something that is very core to something. So the fundamentals of education are reading and writing, for instance, right? The fundamentals of engineering are shapes and forces, right? So on, different things. It can be ideas, or it can be very concrete things, right? The fundamentals of construction are concrete foundations, right? That's not an idea, they're actual things.
Yeah. Great.
In fact, the word fundament comes from the word for before we had concrete foundations, we used stone foundations, and those were called fundaments. So.
Okay. Great. So I don't think we've got any other questions.
Oh yeah! Wow. Are we out of questions? You guys got to ask some more questions. We have some nice comments. HWK is thinking about getting a camera to use for Zoom. Maxie says, "Hey Colin, I love you, my best teacher. You are a pretty awesome teacher." Laxmi to Malsina, hello again.
So
we said hi to number one. Hi, number one. If we didn't.
I think we said hi to number one.
Okay.
So we put a new video out yesterday about phrasal verbs with the words, the verbs see, look, and watch. It's kind of a follow-on from the previous week's video, which was just about those verbs, see, look, and watch. So check that video out if you haven't already. They're interesting phrasal verbs. Interestingly, because they don't really, all the phrasal verbs to do with see, look, and watch, they don't really mean anything to do with looking. at anything,
Yeah.
or like
Or in
the
your
verbs
eyes.
themselves. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. That was kind of a confusing as well as interesting thing.
Which makes it perfect for a video because they're all simple in terms of how they work together, but they're just very different from what you would think they are if you're just looking at the verb and not the phrasal verb.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, keep those questions coming in because we have run out of things to talk about. Well, no, we haven't run out of things to talk about. But we run out of questions from you, and we really want it to be all about questions from you instead of us just talking about ourselves. But yes, if you have just joined us, you're very welcome. And if this is your first time, you're especially welcome. Yeah, so I was saying earlier that we are going to be on Zoom tomorrow, and that's going to be open to everyone, as long as there's not too many people. If there's going to be hundreds, I'm not sure we'll be able to cope. But anyway, I'll open it up to everyone, and we'll see who turns up. We might have to only accept the first 25 people or something if we even get that many. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So I'll tell you now, if you look at the very, very bottom of the description of this video, you'll see the link to the Zoom meeting. And that link will be in there from tomorrow at 2 p.m. That's when that meeting is going to start. So yeah, I really hope you can join us. And that is a little taster of what you'll get as a Patreon or a member of the channel. So yeah, it'll be really great to meet some of you tomorrow. We've already met Gaspar the last couple of weeks, and yeah, so Lolly, I hope you can join us, especially because you're already a member here on YouTube. But tomorrow it will be open to everyone. In following weeks, it's only going to be open to people who are members or Patreons. So do join tomorrow if you're not, because that's the only time it's going to be available for free. Yeah. Okay. So Lolly has a question, not a question, but a comment about phrasal verbs. She says they're a nightmare for her because she can't remember them. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I also the things that make phrasal verbs difficult is how they are. They have lots of different meanings. Well, normally they have at least two meanings.
Right.
And and they can be completely different things. I take off my jacket. The aeroplane takes off. Completely different meanings, but yeah, it's the same phrasal verb. And the other thing that makes it difficult is because it's two words, you can sometimes split them and put an object in the middle. So take your jacket off, you can say, but you can't say take the plane off. Well, you could say take, but it wouldn't mean the plane taking off. It would mean you take the plane off the runway or whatever. But that would be unusual. So some meanings
could take the plane off the schedule.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't that be the flight rather than the plane? Anyway, yeah. So, but the point is, it depends on the meaning whether you can split it with the object or not.
Right.
And it tends to be the more literal the meanings, the more likely you are to be able to split them. As if you want a rule, but like I said, but rules like that.
But that's a good example.
Yeah.
You take something off of something. That's the literal meaning. You take it off, like you take it off a list, right? So I could take the plane off the list of planes that are flying because I'm just using the literal meaning to take something off of something, right? It's not really a phrasal verb. But take off as in is or
the way I've seen that described. Yeah. So you're saying that when it's the literal meaning, it's not technically a phrasal verb.
Well, it depends.
Right?
Yeah. You could make it like there's plenty of places where you could say, well, that's not a phrasal verb. That's just literally what that verb means with that preposition, and that's fine. I don't think there's a it's useful to talk about the line where suddenly now we've crossed over into phrasal verbs because collocation is such a big thing in English, right? There's nothing wrong with thinking of that as a phrasal verb if it's useful. I will sometimes say I don't know if that technically is a phrasal verb because, but I don't think trying to figure out where the line is useful. But yeah, sometimes if something is so literal, it almost doesn't even seem like a phrasal verb at all. And then other times it's so idiomatic. You're like, well, there's no way that means what that looks like it means, right? And that's when it's hard into the territory of phrasal verb. It's really, at that point, it's become an idiom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, we do want to do a lot more videos on phrasal verbs. So
yes, in fact, so much so, let us know what phrasal verbs you struggle with. You can either leave it on as a comment on the phrasal verbs video that we just did on see, look, and watch, or you can leave it here. We can talk about it some in the thing. That's fine. You give us some phrasal verbs, but we do want to continue to do that whole series on phrasal verbs, just because it's not something we're going to like do a whole bunch of right away, but as we come up with words that we really feel like we should do a video on these phrasal verbs, we want to do that. So let us know what phrasal verbs you struggle with. Keep coming back to. Exactly.
Yeah, great. Now Daniel's got a comment here, which we should get to. So he says, can you tell me about 7 deadly sins? I don't know their names in English. I need it for a home task.
So pride, greed, sloth, gluttony, envy, wrath, and lust.
Okay, is that 7?
I mean, that was 7 unless I duplicated one. So pride, I don't know the order though. Pride, greed, envy, gluttony, sloth, lust, and greed. Did I miss? I forget which ones I missed.
No. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Envy. Did you said envy, wrath? Anyway, I found a link. Wrath. I found a link here, Daniel, to the Wikipedia page on this. So they're listed there. But yes, you're right, Tony. That is the 7 deadly sins.
Oh, yes. Vitali also posted it. Lust, gluttony. Well, covetousness and envy are the same thing on the 7 deadly sins list. Or I guess greed. Yeah. So they would usually say greed instead of covetousness there, because covetousness really is more connected to envy than greed, and traditionally it's wrath instead of anger, because So lust. I think typically pride comes first, just because it's the. But yeah. Oh, is that the Wikipedia?
Yeah, I just linked to the Wikipedia there.
Okay, the Wikipedia might be too complicated because it'll probably talk about the whole history of the 7 deadly sins as opposed to the simple list of them.
Well, it does have a simple list as part of the sort of. Oh, does it? Okay. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it does go into lots of detail, but in the contents part, you can just see a list of them. But anyway,
lust, gluttony, greed, but that's not the traditional order. But
yeah. But anyway, Daniel, I don't know that if you were here earlier when we were talking about the Zoom meeting. Tomorrow we're doing a Zoom meeting, and because you're a paid up member, I would really love to meet you tomorrow. So we're going to be doing this every week until the end of February, and then after that, probably we're going to continue doing it, but possibly not every month, every week. But that's only going to be for members. But tomorrow, it's going to be open to everybody, and I mentioned already. If you look at right at the bottom of the description of this video, you'll see the link that you'll be able to follow tomorrow at 2 p.m. to join us in Zoom. I'd especially like to meet you, Daniel, because you're a paid up member and you'll be able to join us every week until the end of February and beyond. So yeah, it'd be great to meet you tomorrow. So let's see, any more questions?
Well, Vitali, about the 7 deadly sins, Vitali is pointing out covetousness is synonymous with greed, but it's important to realize that synonymous does not means the same thing. Okay, no. Means they're similar. Greed is similar to covetousness, but covetousness is also similar to envy, and covetousness is closer to envy than it is to greed. Covetousness is where you want the stuff that other people have. Right? Not you want to have stuff like they do, you want their stuff, right? And envy is wanting what other people have. So covetousness is extremely close to envy. Whereas greed, you can be greedy. You want to be rich. You don't want that person's stuff. You just want to be rich. So yes, covetousness and greed will show up as synonyms, but they do not mean the same thing. So synonym doesn't means the same thing, right? So in this case, greed is the right seventh deadly sin, because covetousness is more another word for envy than it is for another word for greed.
Great. Okay. Now, yeah, I mean, they're fascinating words, because they are all. It's funny that the seven deadly sins, they're not like the most common words that we use. They all have synonyms that are more commonly used, right?
More commonly used, yeah. Gluttony, for instance, people don't use that word very often, right?
No. So anyway, maybe that's another series we can do. Seven deadly sins and words that are synonymous with each one. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
but anyway,
a tricky thing. Like synonyms are where English is one of the hardest parts of English, because it's like whose question was that? Balbal's? Yeah, about all those different words that seem very similar, right? There's a lot of things like that in English, where there's a whole set of words that if you just look them up in the dictionary, you're like, well, they all kind of seem the same if you're not looking at the very specifics. Or if you hear them used and you're like, well, these words are all kind of used similarly, but there is a difference, right? In English, most of the time, sometimes there really is no, like under and below don't mean something different. But even when they don't mean something different, they're often used differently, right? So synonyms are really, the difference between synonyms is where it's what we talk about a lot, and it's one of the main things in really getting to understand English and being at an advanced level.
Yeah. Great. Well, so thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I'm not drawing it to a close, not yet. We've still got 20 minutes left, but we've run out of questions, which we've never done before, really. So get your questions and comments coming in, so we can continue to help you with whatever your questions are about English and learning English. Yeah, let's see. I think we just had some questions coming through. HW says he has a question. Okay, we just got two come through. Two so far. So we'll start with Balbal. Balbal says, what's the difference between agitate and irritate?
Oh.
Now, I think I know this. I'll go first, and then you can correct me, Tony. So is agitate something that's more physical, and irritate, you can irritate a person by being annoying, but it's not necessarily a physical thing. It could be, what you're saying to them, or maybe you're singing in front of in the office or something, and that's just that irritates them. Whereas agitate, it means like to physically stir something to cause some kind of reaction, or to make things mix, like that. I mean, irritate can also be like so if you get something on your skin, it might irritate your skin. But is that right? Is that the main difference?
So did you say that agitate has to be something physical?
Yeah.
So the main difference in terms of how these are used is agitate is intentional. The goal, you're trying to do something to someone, whereas irritation can be passive. So someone can just be irritating,
right,
and they're not trying to bother you, but they do bother you. Whereas if someone is an agitator, or they are agitating, that means they are actively trying to cause problems. I think that there's also a technical definition in terms of like what it caused. Like irritation is more annoyance, whereas agitation is actual problems. But that's not what I see in terms of the usage being the biggest difference. Agitating is intentional, and irritation, like you can be irritating on purpose. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you can say, I was irritating her to be mean, but the word itself doesn't demand it. Whereas you can't really agitate accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So agitate is active. You're doing it on purpose.
Okay, so that's the main difference. I was completely wrong.
Well, I mean, see, what you were saying is kind of is part in with that, right? Because you're doing it, and you have to actually act on someone, do something. Whereas, yeah, you can get something on your skin that irritates your skin, and it's not like trying to hurt you, but it does, right? So irritation is can be more passive; it's broader, whereas agitation is more active. Yeah.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions come in since we
Great.
started answering that one. So we'll start with AJ's, and then we'll go to Rajat, and HWK has a question as well. So AJ says, how can you turn a passive tense into active? So
first, just to say, and I don't necessarily, I don't have a problem with this, but it is something that you will run into. Passive and active are voice, not a tense. Technically, they are not a tense, even though they work very similarly to a tense. And the reason that's important is because they look very like a tense, but the rules are actually different. And so if you're following the rules for tenses, the rules for passive will not quite make sense. So passive is a different thing. It's called voice, active voice, passive voice, not tense. Not that it's a big deal because they are very similar. And understand how to turn it in active. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, because grammatically, in terms of how we form them with auxiliary verbs, it would make sense if they were called tenses, if it was
exactly
tenses, but technically they're not tenses.
But the reason they aren't is because you can add them to any tense. You can make any tense passive. And the key to knowing how to turn something from passive back to active is understanding how it became passive in the first place. You add something becomes passive.
Well, hang on, back up. Let's back up here. Back up. I think we need to explain what it means when something is passive first of all. So when something is active, as in how we speak most of the time, you have the subject and the verb. So the subject is the person or the thing that is performing the verb, and the verb is the action that is being performed. So I walk to work. I am the subject, and I perform the verb of walking. Now, when something is passive, the action is being performed on the subject rather than the subject performing the verb. So you could say, for example, the bank was robbed. So the bank is the subject, but the bank doesn't do anything. It's just sitting there, and then somebody robs the bank, but we don't know who. And really, it's not important who in the sentence, because we're really talking about the bank. So that's why we use the passive when to either emphasize the thing that is the subject that is having the action done to it, or maybe we don't know who performed the verb. Right. So yeah, that's what passive means. Do you want to talk about the structure of it, Tony?
Yeah, so the way you turn something passive is you add in an extra be, auxiliary verb, and this is different from how it works with tenses, and you change the main verb into its past participle form, right? Yeah. The to be verb takes the same form that the main verb would have taken otherwise. So a simple example, my brother hit me becomes I was hit. I add in the be. In this case, this sentence was past simple, so I use the past simple of be, was. And then hit doesn't change because hit is already its past participle, right? So my brother hit me, it becomes I was hit. So to change it back, you take out the auxiliary verb be, and you change the main verb into whatever form the auxiliary verb be had before. So instead of I was hit, my brother hit me, right? A more complicated example might be in the present. Let's see. So I am. Let's see. The bank is, example, compromised. The bank is compromised, right? So I have to change compromise, take away the is, but is in its present simple form, right? So I'm going to take compromised, and compromised, right, with the ed ending is its past participle. So I'm going to take that and put it in whatever form the be verb was. So that's in its past simple form, is. So present simple. So the present simple of compromised is compromise. So somebody compromises the bank, right? Compromise might not be a good example verb there. But
yeah, now this is interesting because it seems very, very complicated, and in a way it is, but it is logical. It does follow a pattern. We often talk when we people who are learning English and teaching English, we talk about how there's lots of irregularities and there's rules, but there's so many exceptions to rules and things. But this, what we're talking about in terms of the structure of sentences, in terms of subject and verb, an auxiliary verb, and how that relates to tense and passive voice and active voice. This is something that is very consistent and very logical, even though it is sometimes, it can get complicated.
But the steps are super simple. Take out look at what form the be verb, the extra be auxiliary is in. Take it out, and then put the main verb in that form, whatever form it was. Steps, very simple, very logical, but then, because it shows up in lots of different complicated ways, it seems like it's, that you might have to think of a long list of things to do, but no, all you have to do is pay attention to what form that auxiliary verb be was in.
Yeah, now I mentioned earlier that we've just launched a course on our website called Inside English, and this is exactly what this course is all about. It's about focusing on the things that do make sense about tense, and we haven't written the module on passive voice yet, but we will do that. So far we've written the first 4 modules. The first module is like an introduction, and then we've got ones on all of the tenses. So we've got the simple tenses, continuous tenses, and perfect tenses. So those are the 4 modules we've done so far. At the moment, we're offering it for 50% at a 50% discount because it's not complete yet. But
when we do finish it, you'll still get access to the whole course if you buy it now.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
So you get it half off, but you don't have to pay for the second half when it comes out.
Yeah. So if that's of interest to you, head on over to the website, englishlanguageclub.co.uk. And there's a link there. Well, that's to the live page. But yeah, englishlanguageclub.co.uk. And you'll see a thing there on the homepage about the course and how to sign up. So great question. Now we've got another question. Let's see. That was AJ's question. So Rajat says, what is the difference between pronunciation, accent, and proficiency? Ooh, interesting question. So, okay, pronunciation and accent are similar, but proficiency is very different. So pronunciation and accent both refer to how you speak, but proficiency is more like a level of a language that you get to. Right. I mean, they often talk about beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then proficiency being the highest level. Right.
If you're proficient, like how well you pronounce words and potentially your accent is going to affect your proficiency. Like if you're not pronouncing words well enough that people can understand you, then you're not going to have a very high proficiency just because you won't be able to be understood, right? But it is a separate thing.
Yeah. So then pronunciation and accents. Well, accents, you get different accents from in different regions, different countries, but even different parts of the same country. Mm-hmm. So in the UK we've got London accents, and you might have a Scottish accent. Whereas pronunciation refers to kind of how you're actually saying the words, or how you're saying each individual sound.
I thought of a good way, since the last time we had this question, a good way to describe it. So your pronunciation is how well you pronounce the sounds that are needed, right? So how well you pronounce the ah and the and all the other sounds. The accent of a word is if you were to say, to transcribe that word into IPA or say what sounds go into this word, that's what is determined, what accent determines, right? The sounds that you would use to make up a word, for instance, mother, and in British or American accents, it's different which sound you use. You don't use the same sound to end the word. So if you had to do the IPA transcription, it shows each individual sound, they would look different in British English and American English because the accents are different. So, however, if I pronounce it, that same sound, but in a different word, Colin and I would pronounce it the same way, right? But it's like spelling, except with sound, is basically what accent is. That just like words are spelled differently, in some different accents, different sounds are used, right? And that's what accent is. Whereas pronunciation is just how well you pronounce those different sounds. Maybe that was too complicated. I don't know. It made sense to me when I thought of it. I was like, oh, this is great, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think we covered that. Hopefully, let us know if that's helpful, Rajat. Hopefully that is. Now, we've got a couple more questions from HWK and Aditi. But I just want to say a couple of things first. One thing I haven't mentioned is that we've also recently launched the Discord channel or Discord server. So you can join us and join other people learning English in the Discord server. And you could always ask questions there, and maybe we'll try and answer you there, or we might even talk, get some questions from there and answer them in the live streams. But yeah, still very new. So we've only a handful of people in there so far, but we're really hoping to sort of get the conversation going in there. And the reason I mention that now is because my phone's been beeping, and it's just telling me that somebody called Adalberto has joined. So if you're watching now, hello to you, Adalberto, and I will come and say hi to you in Discord afterwards. Also, my phone just beeped telling me that someone has joined the Zoom call. Now, the Zoom call is not starting until tomorrow. So yeah, I really hope that you're all going to come and join the Zoom call tomorrow. But it won't be until tomorrow. Now, if you are just joining us, or if you have just joined us and you don't know about the Zoom call is going to be open to everyone tomorrow, not just members. So if you look right at the bottom of the description of this video, of this live stream, you'll see the link to the Zoom meeting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to meeting people tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. HW had a question. So let's go to that. He says, please let me know some vibes that prepositions give off, like off, out, etc. broadly, because some prepositions seem to have a certain meaning, but sometimes it's changed by a verb that follows after.
That it follows
after.
Yeah, so we don't. Prepositions are one of those things that we could talk. No matter how long we talk about them, things are just going to get more complicated, not less complicated. Certainly, you can find diagrams, especially for like what the core meaning of prepositions are, right? Like out and in, like there's a circle. This is in, this is out, right? Or above, below, off means like leaving away from something. So on. You can find lots of diagrams and lots of explanations. The problem is, in English, at least as often as not, the preposition means something a little bit more than its base meaning because of collocations and because of phrasal verbs, right? So yeah, there's lots of. I like this idea of vibes as opposed to the meaning, because yes, the preposition does have a meaning, but then it also has kind of its like more metaphorical meaning that can be really, really complicated. And so generally, we think it's better to, rather than try to learn all of the different things that prepositions can mean, you start getting used to the collocations. What prepositions go with what verbs? What phrasal verbs use which prepositions? And it's one of those things that it's much better to learn by practicing it and making mistakes and being corrected and paying attention and trying to remember what you heard before over time, and let your brain kind of understand it rather than trying to memorize.
Yeah, great question. Okay, and Raja was just asking about the Discord. It says provide the link to Discord, and Alberto, who's just joined the Discord, is telling him that the link is in the description. So yeah, if you just look in the description, there's a list of links to all of our great things. The bottom one, I believe, is the Discord link. So yeah, look forward to meeting lots of you in there. Now. Normally we aim for about an hour, which is about now, but are you okay to carry on a little bit, Tony? We've got a few good questions.
If we've got some more questions.
Yeah.
Vitaly has a comment about the 7 deadly sins that is a good point, because these lists are old, right? So Vitaly says, point taken, but it's greed that's used interchangeably with covetousness in that particular list, if my sources are anything to go by. Thanks for reading my comment. Thanks for the dialogue, Vitaly. And that's a really good point. I don't recall hearing covetousness used instead of greed in the list of 7 deadly sins, but this is a good example of a concept that's been around so long. This concept does not belong to English, right? The 7 deadly sins comes from Latin, and I believe, I don't remember, but off the top of my head, I'm thinking that it's actually the word avarice that's used in Latin, though I can't remember the exact Latin for it, and I could be off. So yeah, you will show anything that's this old and old-fashioned words. Covetousness is an old-fashioned word we don't use anymore, except in religious contexts. Then again, wrath is also a really old-fashioned word, but that's kind of iconically one of the 7 deadly sins. However, in context of modern English, I think it is important to know that covetousness means envy more so than greed. So yes, good point. And you will see different lists of things, anything that's particularly old and has been translated many times throughout history. You'll see different lists with slightly different words. Good catch.
Okay, great. Okay, now Aditi has just joined us and has a question. Yeah, a question now. And also Florence, will get to your question as well. So Aditi says, I had a question that can an accent be relaxed? If so, how? So yeah, we do talk about people having very strong accents, and a lot of people, in fact, there's almost a whole industry around what they sometimes call accent reduction. I don't really like the term accent reduction because there's nothing wrong with accent, and this is the difference between accent and pronunciation. So if you're pronouncing words wrong, then that's an issue. That's something you can work on. But there's no such thing as a wrong accent, or even a bad accent. That's something you'll hear people talk about a lot. But there's no such thing as a bad accent. You just have an accent, or you don't. Now, if your accent is so strong to the point that you're mispronouncing or being misunderstood, then that's a different. That's a different thing.
In which case, the problem is not really the accent. The problem is your pronunciation. Make sure that you're pronouncing words, the sounds, the right way, so that people will understand what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And again, I think what we always say is that pronunciation is physical.
Yes.
So you need to think, and I think accent comes from people being accustomed to making sounds in a certain way physically. So if you want to relax your accent or reduce your accent, then think physically about what it is you're doing differently, and try to work. See it as a physical problem, or not a problem, a physical challenge. For example, the example I always give is the sound, like this and that. To say that sound correctly, you need to stick your tongue out a little bit, because the sound is made by the friction between the tongue and the teeth. So, but a lot of people aren't used to sticking their tongue out, so they almost can't do it. It's like their brain doesn't know what to do when they tell them or their tongue doesn't know what to do. So you sort of need to physically make yourself train yourself to do that. Otherwise, it can come out like a d, because people try to make that sound without using the tongue. So yeah, I would say physical. The best way to improve your pronunciation is to think about it physically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Before we go on to Aditi's other question, Adalberto asked to help you with a question. Go ahead and ask your question in the chat, and we'll see if we can help you. Okay.
Okay. So we'll come back to you, Florence, on Facebook. We've just got Aditi's second question was, why is spelling rarely a good guide to pronunciation? That's a good question. Okay, good answer.
This is actually true. This is actually true of all languages. Some languages pride themselves on the spelling being perfect, and there's never any variations. Vitaly and Daniel, people have told me so many times, they said, oh, in Russian, everything is always pronounced exactly the way it's spelled. You also hear this for Spanish and some other languages. And it's not strictly true, because in any language, over time, words that are more commonly pronounced change in their pronunciation, usually to get simpler, but sometimes they change to be more different from other words, right? So over time, all pronunciation changes. That's history. Sometimes we update the spelling of a word to match its new pronunciation. Sometimes we don't. The reason English is so bad about this, where in English spelling sometimes has nothing to do with pronunciation, is because English's history is so much weirder. Because English it has absorbed all these other languages over time. And so you can often see a word and you can say, okay, well, this word makes perfect phonetic sense coming from Latin, right? So I can look at it and know exactly how to pronounce it because I know it comes from Latin. But you could take another word, and if you tried to pronounce it the same way, it would make no sense because it's coming from German. So it follows more German spelling rules and so on. So that's why English is so mixed up in terms of its spelling, because its history is all these different languages. And then on top of that, over time, pronunciation changes as words get more simple or as they get closer or further from each other, right? So yeah, in English, pronunciation spelling is often not a good guide to pronunciation. Though it's better if you know which language that word came from, because you can kind of use more of its spelling rules and you can figure out how it's pronounced. But that takes a lot more, because then you have to know not only a lot about English, but then you have to know a little bit about French, a little bit about German, a little bit about Latin, a little bit about Greek, and that's just, most people don't do that. So don't worry about it. Great. Okay, just a quick shout out to Kadia, who's joined in Discord. So thank you very much. Great. And Adalberto's put a question there in Discord. So I think I'll go and have a look at that when the live stream ends. So yeah, great. Now another question. Oh no, we said we'd go back to Florence. So we'll do that before we carry on. So Florence says, can you give some examples to understand or identify the subject noun in a sentence? So the subject of a sentence, you can always tell what it is in how it is in relation to the verb, the main verb. Now, so if it's a positive sentence, it's always going to be subject, auxiliary verb, noun, main verb. If it's a negative sentence, it's going to be subject, auxiliary verb, then the word not, then the main verb. If it's a question, it will be auxiliary verb, subject, main verb. So yeah, now this is the actual, in our course Inside English, in the first, I think it's the first lesson, we talk about we talk about this in our first module. There's like 3 key ideas, and this is the first key idea, is that this is one of those things that's really consistent. We always talk about things that are being lots of irregularities and things, irregular verbs and things, but these structures,
positive, negative, and a question, and how the subject and the auxiliary verb and the main verb are structured. This is something that is very consistent and very regular and logical. So it's really good to know these. And so I think this is a good way to identify what the subject of a sentence is, regardless of whether it's a noun or a pronoun. Would you add anything to that, Tony?
Only if you're talking about more complicated sentences where there's many different verbs, then the trick, you can ask the question, who is this sentence about? Who's really performing the main action, even if there's more than one verb, or if it's passive, who's receiving the main action? But then sometimes it can be tricky to find which verb is the main verb if it's a very complicated sentence. So what you want to look for is the verb that fits the pattern Colin was talking about before. Either subject, auxiliary verb, main verb, or subject, auxiliary verb, not main verb, or auxiliary verb, subject, main verb. Whichever one fits that pattern is probably going to be the main verb of the sentence, even if it kind of repeats in like a list. Right?
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we've got one more question from Aditi, and then we're going to end it there. But afterwards, I'm going to head on over to Discord, so maybe some of you can join me there. And of course, tomorrow we've got the Zoom call, so yeah, you're all welcome to join that. So Aditi says, can you pronounce in a British accent the words literally, ironic?
Can I pause you right there?
Yeah.
The word is regardless, not irregardless. This is a common mistake. People say irregardless, but that's not really a word. Yeah. Yeah,
irregardless
is not really a word. It's something that might be one of those situations that's becoming a word, but it's not. It's not a real thing. It's just a mispronunciation of regardless.
It sounds like it would be the opposite of regardless, but that doesn't really make sense.
It doesn't. So it's terrible. It's one of those words we should really try to avoid letting this word become real, because it makes no sense. So just the word is regardless. Never use irregardless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now you can continue with your British pronunciation.
Yeah, so I'll start again. I think we're having some connection issues, but yes, literally, ironic, regardless, whom, nonplussed, disinterested, enormity. Interesting list of words there. I wonder why you've chosen those, but that's great. Yeah, that's a great thing we can do on the live streams. If anyone wants help with pronouncing any certain words, that will be great. A great thing we could do in the future. But we have run out of time for today. But like I've said, if you want to join us tomorrow in Zoom, the link is right at the bottom of the description. You can join us tomorrow, and that is open to everybody, as long as we don't get too many people tomorrow. In the future, that we're going to continue doing those regular live streams, Zoom calls, and those will be just for members and Patreons. But we will continue doing these Hangout live streams every Tuesday at the same time, 2:00 GMT. So hope you'll join us for that, and join us in Discord. I'm going to head on over there now, yeah, that's about it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching if you have been, and I will see you soon.